Hello and welcome to this iron raft self-build tutorial. In the last video I showed you how to do these 4 central seams. In this video I'm going to show you how to do the slightly more complex curving seams towards the end of the pack raft. These ones curve in more than one direction, so you've got your curve going this way and you've got the curve coming in this way. So that's the reason they're a little bit more difficult, because you're dealing with those curves coming together. Okay, so I'm going to show you on the seam towards the end of the boat. It's exactly the same procedure attaching the seam as it has been on the previous 4. Okay, so as before, we flip the pack raft over and I've put my stainless steel mixing bowl on the inside and I'm working on the seam with the seam going out in front of me. You'll see straight away that this one is curving a lot more than the previous ones, and that's the reason why it's a little bit more complex. It's important at this stage to make sure you get this lying as flat as possible and let it lying naturally where it wants to lie. Don't have it like that, because it's going to alter how these line up. So that lying as flat as possible, that one lying as flat as possible, and that's your starting point. Okay, so same as before, we'll be positioning the starting point just on the flat bit of the bowl, and you want to line up your first bit, pin it with your finger, hold this end with your thumb, and put your seam over it, lining that up centrally over the join. Once you've got a central position, lift up your finger, pin it down with your finger, just free that up, and then that's in place, ready to be ironed. Now this one, as it curves so much around, it's really important to maintain that the stretch you're working on is going perfectly out in front of you, and try and keep it straight as possible. Okay, so it's exactly the same process as before. It can help to put that over there to get out of your way. You're going to want to line them up, and these aren't going to lie perfectly flat over there because of your curve. So line it centrally and let that sit wherever it wants to sit, in order to facilitate them butting up nicely to each other like that. Working on a small stretch at a time, no bigger than this, and just work your way along the seam like that. Okay, so on this next section, you'll notice when you have this aligned straight and line these up, they curve slightly to one side. Now there's a way to deal with this without getting wrinkles. So what you want to do is keep that straight. I find if you push the bowl up to your chest a bit, you can wedge it in there and align your curve. So that's straight, that's curving slightly. Take your seam to go on, and same small distance, and align it centrally at the end of your stretch. And if you align it centrally, similar to before, you've now got this bit which isn't going to sit flat with the curve. So what you want to do, instead of iron on top of that, just iron it out. So we'll start from the top, and you can just see I'm pushing it along the seam, sealing down where the iron is and pushing that wrinkle out of the section that I'm working on. It's important to seal the whole width of the seam as you push it. And by using this technique, it's going to avoid that wrinkle being left in the seam once you're done. can now go over right on the edge. Make sure that's sealed right to the edge. And as before, be aware of what your iron's doing here, because you don't want to melt the TPU. So we'll continue this procedure as it continues to curve ever so slightly, lining it up, having a little wrinkle, and just pushing that wrinkle along so that it's not in your seam. Okay, so I'll just give you another quick demonstration of the next section moving along. We've lined this bit up as straight as we can, and then take your seam and it's going to one side, line it up centrally, and again you'll see you've got this little bit sticking up here, and we're going to push that out rather than pushing it down. So get your iron, slowly work your way along, sealing it down, and then once it's sealed down, moving along, pushing it out. As you can see, we've got some little contours at the edge, but we haven't got a large wrinkle. Okay, so as you get about halfway along the seam, you'll notice it starts to straighten up, and you can do it directly, and then soon the two pieces go like this. You see this gap open up in the middle when they're laying down flat, and when you get to that stage, it's going to be a case, like it was on the previous seams, of lining up there and letting it lay wherever it wants to lay on each side. So a line in the center, and then that will mean the fabric will on its own wrinkle somewhere out here, and just let it be. Just make sure you've got your work surface in the middle lined up, and I'll show you an example of that now. Okay, so we've now got to the point where they're curving over each other, and you'll see now, if you try to do what you were doing before, to curve it round and then do that, this is just going to be a nightmare to work with, because you'll be working with that, trying to iron that, and there's just no flat surface. So the thing to do is have that straight on top, line up this one continually straight, and then line up this side with it. You've then got your straight seam, but you've just got to let that lie however it wants. So it's not going to lie like over the bowl and line up. You're going to have a gap. So line it up straight, and it's going to come out here, and just let that be. You've got your working area in the center. You do have to clamp it down quite hard with your fingers though. So just push those two to each other, put the seam on top, hold it down in place with your finger while you iron it, and you can see it's just in its own position on the side. You can have a section of it like this towards the end of the join. Okay, so just to demonstrate another section, we align the piece to be sealed. You've got your seam on top facing straight forward, and push these to make a straight line to be sealed, and by making that straight line it's going to push this out here, and the same on the other side, it's going to push it up into that position. Let that sit like that and connect your section. There you can see the curve that's going to be on the completed boat, and that's why it's important that you don't try and do it like that, because that's no longer going to align for you to iron it. So you're essentially ironing at a right angle. So as you can see, this is really exaggerated on the last section of the seam, where it's going at quite an angle up here, quite an angle up there, and that's why it's so important just to let it lie wherever it wants to lie. So you just concentrate on getting these two aligned there. And if need be, just only doing a small section at a time in order to get them butted up nicely with minimal gap. So as you get towards the end, same as before, you want to not seal right to the very end. You probably want to seal about 5 centimeters from the end. So continue the same process right up to the very end, aligning them, let them go out to the sides, and then yeah, about 5 centimeters from the end. Okay, so once you've got to the end, left your little gap at the end, approximately 5 centimeters or so unsealed. As before, the other seams, go along and see if there's any edges that haven't quite sealed properly. It's likely because this one's a bit more fiddly. And now that it's sealed into its position, you can put it in a more convenient position on the bowl to get a good seal with the iron without touching the TPU. So I'm going to put it here and just iron right up to the edge, being really cautious not to touch the TPU on the tubes that is facing upwards. And just work your way along the whole seam, making sure that you've got a good seal and you haven't missed any bits. So I've turned the boat round and I'm going to do the seam on this side, which is exactly the same process as the seam we've just done on this side. Okay, so I've just finished this seam here. That was exactly the same as the seam on the opposite side. I'm now going to move to the front of the boat and do the 2 equivalent seams to these, running diagonally out. I'm not doing the central seam at this point, that's done at a later stage. These diagonal ones are done exactly the same way as the ones at the back. You've got your one curve going this way, you've got another curve going this way. So use the same technique for that. Okay, so I've just finished off the 2 seams at the front of the boat, the one here and the one here. That's all the curved seams complete, apart from the seam at the front of the boat and the end of the boat, but we're going to do that at a later stage. Right now, we're going to turn the tubing inside out and we're going to run some Aquashore right up the seam. This is a just precautionary seal, which you should hopefully have a nice seal just from your heat sealing, and the Aquashore is purely just in case there are any pinhole leaks that you're not going to be able to access the inside of the Packraft once you've sealed it up, so you may as well do it now. Okay, so once you've flipped the tubing inside out, you may notice there's a few bits that are maybe obvious that you haven't got a good heat seal on. So you can take your iron and just go over any bits from the inside that you want to. Be really careful just to iron over where the seam is. Don't start ironing too far because the heat will transfer and melt the TP on the other side. But just if you see any areas that are obviously needing the attention. Okay, so now you've got it laid out inside out, and you've ironed anything that needed a bit of extra heat sealing from the inside. You're going to get your Aquashore, and we're just going to go along every seam, giving it a generous but not over the top amount of the urethane glue, just to seal it. Where you've connected the seam, right at the very end, you don't want to glue that bit at this point because we'll be gluing that once we've connected the tubes to the floor. So probably start about an inch from that point, so here. I'm just going to go along. There's a brush included in the kit with the Aquashore, and I put on a layer straight out of the tube, and if anything needs brushing I then go back with the brush. You can see roughly the amount I'm putting on. It needs to have a substantial layer, not too thin but equally, not too much. If you are worried that you haven't got a very good airtight seal and you need more Aquashore, then you can always use more, but you will have to purchase more of the glue itself as there's only 2 tubes included in the kit. And once you get to the end, again, just leave it about an inch or so from the end and you can glue that at a later stage. Okay, so that's one seam done, and that's roughly the amount you're looking to use to get a good seal. So now you want to go around and do every seam on the boat that you've heat sealed so far. Okay, so I've now seam sealed the 8 seams and laid them out to set overnight. Lay them as flat as possible as you can, and bear in mind that the Aquashore will run if it's on a slight slope, so if you're working over carpet or anything, just be cautious of that, and you might want to put some newspaper underneath or something to stop the glue hitting the floor. Okay, so I've left the glue to set overnight and that's all dry now. What I'm going to do now is apply some baby powder on top of the Aquashore. We do this because when you seal the tubing to the floor, the Aquashore can actually stick to itself or to anything else inside the tubes, and that can damage it. So by putting the baby powder on top, it takes out the stickiness of the surface and will prevent that happening. Okay, so when you put the baby powder on the seams, don't put too much on, just as much as needed, just to take out the stick on the surface. So I'm literally just getting a fingertip's worth and running it along the bead of Aquashore. It looks a little bit messy, but this is all going to be sealed inside the Packraft, and it's a lot better than having the glue stick to itself and destroying the seal. Okay, so I've now put the baby powder on each one of the 8 seams. Thanks for watching this Iron Raft self-build tutorial. In the next video, I'll be showing you how to seal the tubing sections to the floor and how to seal the end of the seam strips to the floor. So click to watch that video now.